According to the data of the National Institute of Mental Health, in the year of 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic started, an lockdown was set for the people to prevent the spread of the virus. Approximately 17% of the US young adults went through at least one major depressive episode. During this lockdown, people used different ways to cope with their emotions they felt, like building up habits of reading and writing, exercising, drawing, or the biggest solution for many people in this modern era, getting into the media like TikTok, YouTube, Netflix to say the least, with the promise of giving the viewer happiness and a sense of tranquility. But as one begins to interconnect with these apps, the lonelier they may get, because they're just living a cycle where their days revolves around their phones and what they see, and the closer they are to presenting symptoms like a constant feeling of sadness, getting easily irritated, having a sense of guilt, and finally, looking at life without a purpose. One begins to feel lazy about the idea of waking up, and they don't find motivation to keep going throughout their days. That's where video games enter, because they have proven to be capable of helping people in their tough times. In a somewhat contradictory way, there is one game that treats one's loneliness and depression with its dark and eerie atmosphere.
Yes, indeed. The dark sign brands the undead. And in this land, the undead are corralled and led to the north, where they are locked away to await the end of the world.
While doing this research, I encountered multiple threads and testimonies in Reddit conveying how Dark Souls helps the player find their motivation because the game itself is assembled correctly to achieve this. Dark Souls tells a story that takes place in the fictional city of Lordran, where the player takes the role of an undead human that has been chosen to start their pilgrimage on the look for the fate of the undead. The story is not told in a traditional way, and its context is only told through dialogues with other characters and descriptions of items you discover while playing to connect the dots. The game is known for its difficulty when facing enemies, meaning that in-game one will die tens if not thousands of times with their playthrough. And personally, even though I almost destroyed my controller while playing it, I always ended up going back to give it another try, repeating that one phrase of "one more time" that led to more hours of gameplay. Now, in a different game, one would just stop trying after a few attempts. Dark Souls was a different case, which led to the question of, what does this game have that others don't? Why am I motivated to keep on trying until I reach the next checkpoint or beat a certain boss? Well, the player is motivated because the game is designed to fulfill the three psychological needs. These needs are connected to the theory of autonomous motivation, which states that one will engage in something because it appears to be parallel with their own intrinsic ambitions or motivations. Now, there are two types of motivations: extrinsic, where one feels forced to doing something, like that time when you're a little kid and your mom would say that if you didn't do the chores or a homework by a certain time, let's just say things wouldn't be looking so bright for you. On the other hand, there's the intrinsic motivation, where you want to do it. You're sitting there for hours doing it because you enjoy it. This motivation is what leads to those hours of gaming, and it's a more intense feeling than frustration and even depression itself. But how is one able to get to that point of having that impulse to move forward? That's when the three psychological needs enter: relatedness, competence, and autonomy. Relatedness embarks in a sense of identity, on the idea that one is part of something which can be seen in online and in team-based games. Competence is primarily the idea of understanding a situation or an activity they're in. That's the role of tutorials that are seen in video games. It teaches the players the basics so that the rest of the adventure is easier to digest. Finally, there's autonomy, which gives the person control and liberty of how to address something in the game. That's why open world games are so popular. They grant the player the freedom to solve a problem in whichever way they want. Dark Souls and The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild are good examples of this autonomy. The player can wear whatever armor, weapon, magic spell, and even define whatever path they want. To not make this video last any longer, Dark Souls puts to use these three needs in their own unique way, especially relatedness, where it's shown to the player with the initial sequence that introduces us to the game. The city of Lordran is a place with no hope. When we meet our protagonist, they're in a dirty prison cell staring at nothing, until a mysterious knight gives us the key to the cell. And as you explore, you begin to see the desolation, and with it, the thought that you're just another undead. But that's not true. You're the chosen one, the chosen undead with a task to ring the awakening bells. After the mission was set, the game itself places scary beasts and demons since the beginning to resemble one's existential crisis. Dark Souls is a game that takes seriously its own mechanics to use them as a narrative element within the game. The biggest one being the inability to actually die, condemning the protagonist to their eternal resurrection. Moreover, the game knows how to make the user feel identified with its surroundings. It emulates the player's feelings based off how similar the character's appearance is to the enemies. Both the protagonist and the enemies use the same item to heal themselves, and they both resurrect instead of dying. In a depressive state, one feels useless, like nothing to do, it'll always be wrong. In Dark Souls, it's the same feeling, but the mechanics disciplines the player to not view those mistakes and failures as something bad. It becomes something that the player expects. Throughout the game, they are punished with the extreme difficulty of the areas, constantly, which causes one death after the other. But it reaches a point where they embrace the idea of losing, because with every death, there's a lesson that they can analyze and later learn from to prevent from dying that same way, and beginning to see those failed attempts as a way of learning that can also be integrated as their own philosophy. Now, in comparison to other games, it's somewhat impossible to feel calm while playing. One feels frustrated, anxious, stressed, and even betrayed by the game's own mechanics. But it still makes the player repeat the phrase, "one more time." Something else that Dark Souls does is taking away the three needs with the purpose of getting a certain feeling. Most of the playthrough, one is exploring their surroundings in silence. No sounds other than the protagonist's footsteps in the rocks and the concrete, giving a sense of loneliness and craving for some type of interaction with anything that doesn't want to kill them. Throughout the story, the player will meet characters that they can interact with that will help them throughout their pilgrimage and deafen that idea of being alone. In a game like this, where one can't relate to anything, small moments like this.
Goodbye then. Be safe, friend. Don't you dare go hollow.
Don't get yourself killed. Neither of us want to see you go hollow.
Become a memorable interaction. Now, looking at the idea of competence and its use, it is primarily seen in boss fights. Once again, it teaches the player small but important lessons that make these fights easier to get through, like beginning to use the shield more often to repel certain attacks. However, that's where the game also takes away one's competence. The shield won't be able to protect the protagonist from attacks the whole time because there is a wide variety of these that are unblockable, motivating the player to learn the moveset of each type of the enemies they encounter in their adventure. Finally, there's autonomy, which grants the player the liberty to approach any enemy or area in the way they want. They can either attempt to fight a tough enemy and die trying, explore a zone to get rid of the minions around it and have some distance between that tough enemy, or simply ignore it and make their way through the zones. There's a variety of ways of doing things within Dark Souls, which autonomously motivates you, the player, to progress through the campaign. There's no map or order of how to do things in Dark Souls. One chooses its own path. Now, there are 9 things that the Dark Souls experience teaches you, and a theory of self-determination recommends to create activities that intrinsically motivates people. Self-awareness, self-knowledge, problem-solving and decision-making skills, ability to defend themselves, and finally, the ability to create plans of action that reach certain goals, and self-regulation and self-management. This way, Dark Souls teaches you to become someone self-determined. The game, in a way, understands what one feels, Its world interprets how one's mind is fighting obscure thoughts while the player is forced to explore and know more about the city of Lordran, know more about themselves. In the end, one understands who they are, and at the end of the adventure, the player concludes that even though they've been in hell and back, they still manage to heal themselves, fighting every obstacle and avoid going hollow.